Good afternoon to you. It is 4:06 here at News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. Coming up today, Julio Rosas joins us at 4:30. We're going to take a closer look at this Democrat out of Minneapolis who is now all of a sudden pro-cops after previously calling for their dismantling. Her personal life has a lot to do with this. And then Kurt Schlichter joins us coming up at 5 o'clock to encourage conservatives to find their joy again, which is good. That'd be good. I'd like to talk to him about that. And we'll chat with you at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. Let's bring in a man who's always joyful, Congressman Matt Rosendale. He represents Montana's 2nd Congressional District in Congress. Sir, good to have you with us.
Well, I'm just thrilled that you call me always enjoyable to have, because I think there's some people in Washington that would disagree with that.
Well, all of our conversations have left me smiling. I know, but we talk about a lot of important stuff, Matt Rosendale, and that includes today American energy. We're looking at the Biden administration has canceled, again, new oil and gas leases in Alaska, and it's causing all sorts of chaos, including in that state. What is happening here?
So let me lay out the table for you here, Vince. Gasoline prices hit $4.10. They hit over $4 a gallon at the pump here in Montana. A week and a half, 2 weeks ago. Diesel is well over. It's $4.50, $4.70 a gallon. And we look to the president and say, what are you going to do to help us with the energy prices? Okay, Biden says, I'm going to go ahead and raise the rates on all the folks that are trying to lease ground. I'm going to increase the regulations on them. I'm going to take 13 million acres and put it off limits, and I'm going to cancel approximately 180,000 barrels a day of production because I won't let the drilling begin in the ANWR, the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. That's a great idea. We're going to see energy prices continue to climb, and you and I both know it hurts manufacturing, it drives inflation rates higher, and it hurts those on the lowest end of the income scale the greatest, whether they are trying to put gasoline in their car to get to work or whether, guess what? Winter is looming on the horizon, and when they go to heat their homes this winter and the price costs them twice as much, there's going to be people that are going to suffer.
Meanwhile, it does help somebody, and that somebody is Saudi Arabia and Russia. Saudi Arabia and Russia are now trying to, the Financial Times reports today, push the price of oil towards $100 a barrel right now. I thought we were at war against Russia, and now Biden is actually increasing the size of their war chest.
Sure, and where does that go? Directly to their war machine. So on one hand, he's asking Congress to authorize another $24 billion to send to Ukraine, and meanwhile, he's pumping up, literally, the price of oil, which gives Putin the ability to fund the war machine against Ukraine. I mean, you can't make this stuff up.
It's the dumbest possible thing, Congressman. How do you have rational conversations with other lawmakers when these are the circumstances we're living in? We're actually increasing the wealth in Russia that they can use to prosecute a war against us, which we're fighting by proxy with Ukraine. We're dumping in all these resources. Why are we doing that if we're only going to improve Russia's hand?
Yeah, if we're talking about having intelligent conversations with members, I'm very selective about who I enter into this with, because I will not waste my time with folks that think that our energy needs can be produced by unicorns and rainbows, okay? I brought two members of Congress to Montana last week, Representative Eli Crane and Andy Biggs, both from Arizona. This is the second time I've put this tour on. And within my district, I have 4 oil refineries. I have several coal mines. We visited an oil refinery. We visited a coal mine, a mine-to-mouth operation, where the coal that is mined from the ground goes directly from that facility through conveyor belt to an electric power plant. We went to a hydroelectric facility. and we went to the nation's only palladium platinum mine. And all of that infrastructure and those resources are located right here within my district. I had a great conversation with them because they understand that producing domestic energy is not only important to our economy, which it is. It provides jobs. It keeps inflation down. But it's critically important to our national security.
It's the closest thing we have to a big answer to a lot of our questions. How do we right the economy? How do we take care of American communities? How do we produce useful exports? How do we ensure our national security? How do we disable our opponents? It is wrapped up in this, in energy. And yet the Biden administration is selling us out, Congressman.
Yeah, he absolutely is. You know, I find it interesting that even the entire Alaska delegation, so Murkowski, who is not what we would call a rock-ribbed, conservative, right. Murkowski and Dan Sullivan and the Democrat representative, they only have the one, Mary Patola, as a Democrat, all three of them issued a joint statement saying this is ridiculous. Why, those are my words. So don't say that I'm misquoting them, but they said that this is wrong, that we should be producing this energy. We have the ability to produce it in a safe, environmentally sound fashion. You know, it's interesting. Back in 1977, they opened up the Trans-Alaska Pipeline. That thing is 800 miles long. I don't know, you're younger than I am, Vince, but I can remember that there were just people were the gnashing of teeth and the wailing that it was going to stop the migration of the caribou and destroy everything. No, what it's been doing is producing millions of barrels of oil a year for the United States to make sure that we can fulfill our energy needs. And the caribou get real used to that pipe, and they just walk underneath of it, and they continue their migration. They don't have a problem.
Yeah, sure. And by the way, that's a useful environmental debate. I don't mind talking about migration patterns and if a pipeline will get in the way. That's fine. But what's not a useful debate is disabling Americans and leading them to backwards technologies that aren't going to help them at all. Like, we're putting people on windmills. We're making it so that they can't use their power during peak times. They can't charge their electric vehicles. We're now told that the electric vehicles they've been pushing on us are worse for the environment than the internal combustion engine. It is just like nonsensical, Congressman. And I'm hoping at some point sanity prevails.
It does. So let me tell you something. During my energy tour last year when we went out, we also went to a wind farm. We couldn't fit it in this year because it was just too far out of the way. But I had that in my district as well. So north of Miles City, about 70, 80 miles north of Miles City, Montana, there's a huge wind farm. It's 135 wind turbines there. And the only reason that works in that location is because, number one, the local energy company closed down two of the coal-fired generators at the very plant that I went to last week, the coal-fired plant. So two of the four of those generators have already been shut down, and so it made available all of that electricity on the transmission line. Okay, so you've got a transmission line, and it can only accommodate so much electricity coming through there. And once they close down those two units, now this additional power comes on. So keep in mind, it is only efficient, and this is one of the most efficient wind farms in the country, only able to produce 100% of its capacity 40% of the time. 40% of the time.
And where are those? Where are those windmills built, Congressman? Where do they build those windmills?
I couldn't even tell you where they're built. Is that another product from China? Probably. But
Probably.
I can't, But what I do know is if they didn't receive a $30 million subsidy from the taxpayers, then it would not be economically feasible.
Of course not. As you know, we found out this week, the Wall Street Journal had a great write-up on this. They said that so-called Inflation Reduction Act that was shoved through Congress last year that has nothing to do with inflation except for driving it up. In fact, included 50% subsidies for these green energy companies. And now green energy companies across the board are increasing their prices upwards of 60% for their products. Who could have seen that coming, Congressman?
Yeah, that is exactly right. And there are a lot of people who are personal friends of the radical environmentalists and the Democrats that are profiting dramatically. Anytime somebody says that, well, we need to make sure that we're utilizing ESG standards, or someone says that we have got to be, on the front line of fighting climate change, you better start looking into their business and seeing exactly where they're getting their funding from, because I will tell you, it's typically from, the Inflation Act that Biden passed, that he is siphoning these funds over to these organizations.
Actually, speaking of that, financial motivations, I want to bring up some news today. Nancy Pelosi has announced that she's going to be running for re-election in the United States House again for some reason. She is old. She's 83, and she's filthy rich. She's worth well over $100 million. Some estimates closer to $200 million. Congressman, what do you think of Nancy Pelosi, the old rich lady who's not ready to give it up?
I won't condemn anybody for working honestly to become successful and wealthy. I think that's a wonderful thing. It's what our country is based upon. Okay? That's great. That's fine. But I will tell you this, that I walk around the halls, and when I see people that are not at their peak of intellectual capacity and ability to perform at that level constantly, then it's concerning to me. But you know something? If the people of San Francisco want to continue to vote people in that promote outdoor recreation living, meaning the tent folks, and poop on their streets, I'm glad I live in Montana. We have cow manure out in the pasture, but the only time we have manure in the streets is when we have a 4th of July parade and the horses ride through. And guess what? Even those folks pick up after themselves.
Yeah, that's what we would call a welcome sight versus what we see in San Francisco. Thank you very much, as always, Congressman Matt Rosendale. Really appreciate your time today, sir. Thank you.
Thanks for having me on, Vince.
Congressman Rosendale. I'm pointing out the obvious. But we can deal with animal waste. Human waste on the streets? No thanks. All right, let's take a call. We've got Jeffrey calling in from Mount Airy. Jeffrey, good afternoon. You're on the Vince Coglianese Show.
Yes, sir. Thank you for taking my call. First, I think you do a brilliant job of cutting through the nonsense and getting to the core issues. I really appreciate that. So,
thank you.
I'm calling because – no, you're welcome. I'm calling because yesterday you briefly mentioned the political activity conducted by the Pentagon advocating the promotion of general officers.
Yes.
Over the delays caused by Senator Tuberville.
Yes.
Well, I found that really incredibly disturbing. These military officers are natural socialists. They favor top-down dictatorial methods to solve problems. And they look competent because we give them incredible amounts of resources to solve problems. But, of course, they're going to get something out of it. But it seems like the longer these officers stay in Washington, divorced from their operational units, they become more socialist and become entrenched in this idea of entitlement, which is extremely dangerous.
So let me
no business. Yeah.
Let me catch people up, Jeffrey, because I think you've done a pretty good job summarizing what's going on here. But just to remind people, Tommy Tuberville has made a decision that he's not going to allow all of these Pentagon nominees to go through en masse through a voice vote, basically unanimous consent in the Senate. Do we have unanimous consent? No objections? Okay, great. Everybody's through. He's saying if you're going to do it, you're going to do them one by one. So you can do the nominations, but I'm just not going to grant you unanimous consent. I'm as a senator, that's my right, and you'll have to take these up one by one. And the reason he's got this position is because the Pentagon has started to violate the law. They are using federal tax dollars to facilitate abortions. They are committing abortions with federal money. And Tommy Tuberville said, wait a second, you can't do that. So you don't get these nominations through. That's what I'm going to do here unless you do them on an individual basis. He's being demonized for this. And Democrats are not even putting the people forward to be confirmed. They're not putting them forward individually. So they are trying to score some political points out of this, too. And what we saw this week is a number of military officials, to include the Secretary of the Navy, who came out and said that Tommy Tuberville is aiding and abetting communists and authoritarians. This is a military that's supposed to be responsive to civilian leadership, and that includes the elected representatives of the people. This is a very insubordinate and crazy time we're living through.
Exactly. Military officers should not be involved in any political decisions. They're there to carry out the policies that are articulated by Congress and the president and ultimately the people of the United States. What are they doing? Politicizing the military like this.
I know.
It's extremely, extremely dangerous. I can't believe that is happening in this country.
And it's another sign of our decline. So, Jeffrey, let me play some audio here. This is Senator Mike Lee reacting to the Secretary of the Navy saying that Tuberville is helping the communists and authoritarians.
Let this message to Secretary Austin and Secretary Del Toro be clear. If you want to make laws, run for Congress. You can't legislate from the E-ring of the Pentagon. Until then, stand down and leave the lawmaking to the lawmakers. Americans overwhelmingly agree that the federal government should not use U.S. taxpayer funds for abortions. To that end, Congress has passed laws providing just that. One specific law deals specifically with the U.S. Department of Defense. You may not use Department of Defense funding or facilities for abortions. It's Congress that makes the laws, not the Department of Defense. Senator Tuberville is right to oppose this egregious policy, and he is well within his rights as a member of the United States Senate to take this position.
It's just crazy that a senator has to say that, Jeffrey.
Yes, I agree. I appreciate you bringing up the issue. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you for the call, Jeffrey, pointing out that this is an outrage. And you know what's amazing about this saga? We've been covering it here. I've been talking about it now for weeks, what Tommy Tuberville's been doing, standing up for decency, standing up for life, standing up for the law, requiring the Senate to use normal procedure. And I feel like, this audience and this show, we're like the only people in Washington even doing this. How come there aren't more Republicans even standing up, doing what Mike Lee did, standing up and giving speeches on behalf of the rightful place of Congress in this conversation, and more importantly, the American people? Fight for the damn country. Tommy Tuberville standing up. Good for him. May it continue. It's 429. Good afternoon to you. Good to have you with us here on WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. Coming up on the program, we're going to be joined by Kurt Schlichter at 5 o'clock. We'll talk about reasons for optimism for Americans everywhere. That's ahead, and you can join us at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. Paying attention to a Democrat who says she got carjacked this week. She's a Democrat official in Minnesota. She's a part of the Democrat Party there. They call it the Democratic Farmer Labor Party there. And her name is Shivanthi Sathan Andan. I don't know if I've got that right, but I've tried, okay? So credit for that. And a couple years back, she had called for abolishing the police. She got in on the action there. And now she's very grateful for the police, and she would like the cops to catch more criminals on the streets, she says, in order to make her community safe. For more on this story and some of the unanswered questions, we turn now to Julio Rosas. He's a senior writer for Town Hall, author of the book Fiery But Mostly Peaceful, The 2020 Riots and the Gaslighting of America. Julio, good to have you with us, sir.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Vince.
Okay, so tell me about this woman. I'll just call her Shivanthi. That's the easier name to say. Who is she? What has she advocated for in the past, and what has she recently experienced?
So she is the second vice chairwoman for the DFL, which is, as you mentioned, what they call Democrats up there. I just call them wrong, but that's what they call them up there. But the reason why she has gained attention since yesterday is because she posted on her Facebook page that she was not just carjacked, but violently carjacked. She said she suffered a broken leg, lacerations. She said the only description of the suspects she has given is that they were just four armed young men, and they took her car from her driveway. She said neighbors were present, to witness the carjacking. Police later did find her vehicle, and the reason why this case is interesting is not just because, I mean, you're right, she didn't even just say to defund the Minneapolis Police Department after George Floyd, but she said we need to dismantle it entirely.
Yes.
And she also praised when schools and colleges in the city at the time decided to cut ties with MPD. So I mean, she was really on board that train.
And I want to point something out too. The people of Minneapolis got an opportunity on a ballot to consider abolishing their police department, and they voted to keep it. They wanted the cops in the city, so the people would eventually get a say on this question, and they kept them around.
Exactly. And so there are a few questions exactly what went down, just because the photo that she posted. It seems a little off. The blood doesn't look, people are saying the blood doesn't look exactly right. And, if she has a broken leg, why is she standing as it appears in the selfie? And so I did get a copy of the police report. And the police report did say that, there were two victims, there were two eyewitnesses, and they described her as victim one, who had, possible internal injury and also other major injuries as well. So, there still needs to be a few things fleshed out in order to really get a sense of what happened. And I'm waiting on the body camera footage that the police report says is available. So we'll see. Hopefully that will clear some of the air more and provide some answers on exactly how this went down.
Gotcha. So what you're talking about is there's a photo of her that appears to be a selfie. She's staring into the camera with kind of a sad look on her face, and then she has blood kind of stained along the side of her face. And she writes in the caption for this, quote, "I'm now part of the statistics. I wasn't silent when I fought these men to save my life and my babies, and I won't be silent now. We need to get illegal guns off of our streets, catch these young people who are running wild, creating chaos across our city, and hold them in custody and prosecute them, period." In other words, she wants the cops involved in safeguarding her city. But you point out, is this like skepticism you've seen online? Are you personally skeptical of elements of her story, Julio?
Yeah, so initially when I did see the story, I kind of took it at face value because, I mean, it's a pretty drastic thing to make a claim for, especially if you're claiming that there's other people that have seen it.
For sure.
But like, as I mentioned before, and look, I'm no doctor, I'm no, mortician or what have you, but yeah, there's no visible wound. Like, you don't see a cut on her face. You just see, the blood, and that seems a little watery. I mean, there could be a ton, that she could have had a filter on it. There's a lot of different things that could kind of help explain that. But
True.
That's why and so I reached out to some sources, and, the police report did kind of say, she was hurt at a minimum.
Yeah.
So I view it as crossing our T's and dotting our I's.
I get that, but I guess
to really make sure.
One thing I wonder, though, I was talking to Corey about before you came on about this very story, and I said, what would her motivations be, though? What would her motivations be for dramatizing this? I mean, it's bad enough just to be carjacked. Why would you need to, fake getting bloodied up if that's what actually happened?
That's kind of what I'm wondering as well, especially given her past comments. And it's also kind of funny, too, because Liz Collins, who's a local reporter there for Alpha News, she said sources told her that she actually was upset at the response time, which apparently was only 5 minutes, which, especially in a city like Minneapolis, is a pretty good response time.
Yes. Did we lose Julio? Oh, there he is.
So,
yeah.
It's
an argument for guns, is what you're saying.
Well, the response time, if you're concealed carrying, is a lot faster than 5 minutes.
Yeah, that's for sure. Yeah, no question whatsoever. She's complaining about 5 minute response time. She's making an argument for the Second Amendment. And she may not even realize it. So at the end of this, does this lady become a Republican in your view, Julio, given the radical changes she's experienced?
Well, if the border crisis has taught us anything in sanctuary cities, they've more, at least the leaders tend to double down, as opposed to saying, no, we don't want to be a sanctuary city. So I wouldn't see how, especially when it comes to crime, I don't see that happening anytime soon. And look, obviously it's good that she survived, because her kids, get hurt, in the way that she said what happened. But it's just a matter of, let's just see what further evidence we have to make sure that we get our story straight.
You mentioned that one of the things that she's supported in the past is getting the cops out of the schools. For instance, these school resource officers that you see in so many school districts across the country. It's my view, Julio, that this is a really bad idea for a number of reasons. But if one of the core things you're interested in as a lefty is having cops develop better relationships with the community, why wouldn't you want to have good examples of police officers developing relationships with young people inside of city schools?
Well, they have this view where it's the school to prison pipeline, which I think is a bit of a fallacy, or a little bit, overstated, because they say, well, cops are in the schools, a kid does something bad, and then they just immediately go to juvie. But that's not necessarily how it works. And
they don't arrest you for no reason in school. Unless your name is Trump, you're not being arrested for no reason.
And so there's a problem today now that with the schools that have gotten rid of the cops in 2020, they're now having a lot more problems with serious crimes being committed on campus. And so, again, it's just one of those reflexive policies that to them sounded really good, even though everyone else is saying, no, that's a bad idea. And they went ahead anyway to do it because it looks good and, virtue signaling.
Yes.
But then once the actual consequences come about, then it's like, it's the consequences of my actions. And it's like, well, we told you. And so that's why people were dunking on the chairwoman, because she was, full-throated. She was in full support of this movement, even though, again, people with cooler heads are saying, no, this is a bad idea. And now she is reaping what she sowed back then. And it's unfortunate.
Have you been shocked at all by how much the left had been gaslighting on this issue? Because, it was during 2020 that so many of these lefties were either openly calling for the abolition of police or who were contributing money to bail funds of people who were attacking cops, like Kamala Harris. And now they claim that it's actually Republicans who are trying to defund the cops and that Democrats were never for abolishing the police.
I'm not surprised, because they know just how bad of a policy idea it is and just how bad of an idea it is in general. And so it's not surprising that they're trying to say what's Republicans. And, of course, their only recourse is like, they didn't vote for this one bill in Congress that would have funded the police in some areas. But, as typical congressional bills goes other stuff as well. It's not just that. So that's their only basis, whereas, there's plenty of examples of Democrats, especially in 2020, who were trying to go much further than that. So it's a bad idea. It creates this culture that we're in now, where we're constantly under feared by criminals.
Yes.
It's not just Minneapolis; it's major cities across the country, and so it's just politics when they do that, and it should be of no surprise that they're trying to end it on Republicans, who, of course, are not at all in that same league by any stretch.
So, Julio, you, of course, wrote a whole book on the subject, and you were on the front lines of 2020. You saw the rioting and destruction and death that was taking place in American cities that year. One of the outcomes of this, even if it takes lying on the part of the left, that seems to be headed in the right direction, is at least more acknowledgement of the need for cops. That's a good thing. Do you think we've learned the sufficient lessons from 2020 to apply to the United States now?
Yes, but I think it's also the fact that it's kind of too late, because it festered for a couple of years, right? There's only been a quick turnaround within, recently. And so the reason why I say that is because people say, well, the police departments were actually defunded. In fact, today they have more funding, which is true, but what good is having more funding when no one wants to be in a cop anymore? Because of the culture and the environment that they have to operate in now, where their hands are tied behind their back, and they do arrest people, throw criminals Soros back the age, give them sweetheart deals, and just let them right back out to the streets, and they commit more crimes all over again. So the issue isn't funding the police. The issue now is the culture that was allowed to take place, because people saw, and I saw firsthand how emboldened people got because they saw how far they were able to get away with in 2020.
Right.
So it's a low intensity breakdown as opposed to a high intensity breakdown.
And we're watching this week as we're getting a number of sentences yet again for people who were either in the Capitol building on January 6th or who were distant but communicating with them. In the case of Enrique Tarrio, he gets 22 years in jail now for the events of January 6th. He was not at the Capitol building, and yet there's a useful comparison that was featured by Byron York this week. Tom Cotton's been interested in it, of a man who killed during the BLM rioting killed another human being by setting a building on fire. He only received 10 years in jail because prosecutors said that he was fighting for a good cause. That's the reason why his sentence needs to be dropped. What if any has been the result of all of the destruction in 2020? Have there been meaningful consequences for that?
I mean, and that's the whole point. I mean, and that's why when it comes to January 6th, it's so frustrating to see, because when you allow people to do that, because to a certain point it was allowed to happen in terms of the BLM riots, because there was a hesitancy to crack down on them because they didn't want to look racist and they want to do the opposite of what Trump was saying, so they're going to take a more hands-off approach. And so the lesson here is that there really is a two-tier justice system. It favors the left. And that's why, and I wouldn't be surprised at all that they're definitely really trying to drop the hammer on non-violent J6 participants, because it sends a message, and that's why there's a lot of concern when it comes to the outcome of next year's election. And which side has a reaction to that, it remains to be seen in what actually happened. But I personally wouldn't be surprised if I'm busy all over again like I was in 2020, just because we've had 4 years now of emboldening criminals, more polarization, more discontent because of the injustices that are being continued on to this day. It's just a bad recipe. So I'm not trying to wish cast that or anything, but I'm also being realistic, because I've seen it on the streets. I mean, the anger is very, very palpable. The chaos is very, very real, despite what some liberals might say, like, oh no, the cities are fine. They're not. And I just personally feel like we're heading in a better direction, but it remains to be seen.
Well, you're right about that. If Julio Rosas gets busy, it's a bad sign for our country, and so I'm going to pray for you to have a very easygoing year ahead. Julio Rosas, thank you very much. I really appreciate your time, as always, sir. The California State Assembly today, you should know, just passed along a bill, headed to Gavin Newsom's desk now, that will allow parents to lose custody of their children if they refuse to accept their fantasy as reality. If a child becomes convinced, if they're convinced by, say, their teachers or the school administrators that they're not actually a little boy, they're a little girl, even though they're obviously a boy, biologically, they're a boy. If they say, I'm a girl, and the parent doesn't go along with it, the state can now take the child. California. This is a Democrat today standing up, making the case for why, in the state assembly, making a case for why this is such a great thing.
That parents affirm their children. They have since the dawn of time. Typically, it happens when their gender identity expression matches their biological gender. But what happens is when it doesn't, that's when the affirmation starts to wane, and that's what we're dealing with here. Although it's called the TGI bill, they're not mentioned anywhere in the law. What's mentioned in the law is the child's gender identity and expression, and the parent's affirmation of that, whatever it is, because that is our duty as parents, to affirm our children.
You need to indulge your child's fantasy, one that was put into their head probably by some ill-meaning adult, until they destroy themselves or until they're helped along in their destruction by other adults. That's what she's saying. And if you don't do that, that child will be taken from you by the state of California. It is unbelievable that we have come this far as a country. And for her to stand up there, and they use this language like they're on the side of decency and science and morality, when, of course, this is an abandonment of all of that. A complete disgrace. Colin Rugg on Twitter, X, points out that State Senator Scott Wiener, that's his real name, who has no kids, co-authored this legislation. So some weirdo with no children, no skin in the game, has decided that he needs to pass a piece of legislation to take other people's children away if they don't destroy them. It is just sheer lunacy. And this kind of goes back to what Ken Cuccinelli was talking about earlier with us. Like, does this message break through? Are there enough normal people to right the ship here in the United States of America across all demographics? Cuccinelli was saying that among Hispanic Americans in particular, there's a massive shift towards the right, and it's predicated on a return to normalcy. Like, that's not normal. That's insane. This would 5 years ago, this would not have passed muster. Not even in California. There'd be no way. And here they are jamming it through the state assembly, sending it off to greasy Gavin Newsom, who's a coward. He'll sign this into law. He doesn't care. He'll do it because he's scared of these other people, and he knows better, but he doesn't care. He doesn't care. We're going to take kids away from people's parents. And the good guy in the story is the parent who's looking out for their kids, who's grounding them in reality, who's saying, I'm not going to indulge this fantasy. My kid right now, she's 9. She likes Harry Potter. If she walked up to me and said, I don't just like Harry Potter, I actually think I'm a witch. I'm not indulging that. I'm not destroying my kid. And they shouldn't do it there either. So we got to stand up for our people, and especially our children, in the face of this demonic tyranny taking place on the West Coast. And unfortunately, so many of these things move east. Stay with us.